Hola, ¿cómo estás? Espero que estés súper bien. This is Tamara Marie, host of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Now, before we jump into this episode, I wanted to let you know about a special opportunity that you're definitely going to want to take advantage of, especially if your goal is to become fluent in Spanish. For a limited time only, my team is opening the doors to listeners of the podcast to take advantage of a free language coaching session. Now, in this session, it's not just we're teaching you about verbs or grammar, but we're really going to do a deep dive into what are your goals for learning Spanish, assess where you are on your journey to fluency at the moment, and help you map out a 90-day plan for how you can get to fluency. So we are going to help you take your Spanish to the next level, whether you're afraid of speaking Spanish or you just get a little bit nervous when you're talking to native speakers, or maybe you've got some of the basics down, but you really know that you struggle with getting your Spanish to flow and your listening skills aren't up to par. Whatever it is, even if it is a specific grammar issue, we will help you map out how to tackle that. And normally these sessions do cost, so we are offering a few slots for free. There are limited spaces available and they'll only be open up through the end of the month. So make sure you sign up. Go to SpanishConSalsa.com/coach. That's SpanishConSalsa.com/coach to book your free language coaching session where we will help you map out a 90-day plan to get to Spanish fluency. Okay, let's get started with the episode. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Espero que todo esté bien contigo. This is Tamara Marie, host of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. I wanted to ask you a quick question before we get started with this episode. Do you have trouble hearing and understanding native Spanish speakers? Whether you've been learning Spanish for 2 weeks or 2 years, it can be a struggle to really understand the fast pace of Spanish spoken by native speakers. So if that's you, don't worry, I got you. I have developed a method that will help you understand 80% of spoken Spanish in less than 30 minutes. This method will help you improve your ability to hear and understand native Spanish speakers so you can increase your listening comprehension and shed your fear of being afraid to start a conversation. You know, a lot of times we don't want to talk to someone in Spanish because we're afraid that when they talk back, we're not going to understand what they say. So we really need to get after that fear by improving our Spanish listening skills. So if this is something that you're interested in, I'd love to share it with you. Providing access to this masterclass absolutely free so that you can learn how to improve your Spanish listening skills. If you want to sign up, just go to SpanishConSalsa.com/listen. That's SpanishConSalsa.com/listen. Now, we're only going to have this masterclass available for a limited time, so make sure you sign up today if you want to get access, SpanishConSalsa.com/listen. Okay, let's get to this episode of the podcast.
Bienvenidos! Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast, the show for Spanish learners that love music, travel, and culture. Close your grammar textbooks, shut down the language apps, and open your ears to how Spanish is spoken in the real world. Let us show you how to go from beginner to bilingual. Here is your host, certified language coach, Tamara Marie.
Hola, bienvenidos al episodio 147. Welcome to episode 147 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Now, this week, we are going to be talking about a super important topic. Now, if you've been learning Spanish for a while or if you're just getting started, it's really important to know how to answer some simple questions in Spanish. And in this episode, I'm going to cover 5 questions that you absolutely must be able to respond to in Spanish if you are going to become conversationally fluent in the language. Now, I know a lot of times we start learning vocabulary or we might get obsessed with grammar, and in doing so, our conversational skills may be neglected. And it isn't until you actually are confronted with someone in front of you asking you questions in a conversation that you realize that you have no idea how to respond. So I've got you covered in this episode. We're going to go through some things that maybe you already know if you're more advanced, but if you're just starting out or if you haven't been in the habit of having a lot of conversations in Spanish lately, then this might be something that you need to brush up on as you begin to have more and more conversations. So I'm going to assume you already know the basics of Hola, ¿cómo estás? Estoy bien, gracias. ¿Y tú? ¿Y usted? I'm going to assume you know that. You know how to say, me llamo Tamara. Mi nombre es Tamara. And if you don't know and this sounds complicated to you, please download our beginner's guide to Spanish conversations. You can just go to SpanishConversationGuide.com. Really easy, SpanishConversationGuide.com if you need to start from ground zero with all the basics. But I'm going to assume that you at least know how to say those few things. And we're going to talk about some ways that you might start a conversation and some questions that might come up in the course of your conversations that you should be able to answer with some fluidity. Now, even if you hear some of these questions and you know how to answer them, I want to challenge you, especially if you're more of an intermediate Spanish speaker or even an advanced beginner, I want to challenge you to think about how you commonly respond to these questions and see if you can make your answers a little bit more detailed, more robust, and more fluid. So keep that in mind as we go through. Remember, our goal is that we want you to sound as natural speaking Spanish as you do your native language, which I'm presuming if you're listening to this podcast is probably English, or you're pretty advanced or fluent in English at the very least. So we want to be able to have our conversational expression in Spanish flow. And the way to do that is to really get good at answering some of these questions, practicing them, and getting better and better at giving more fluent answers to these questions. So even if you know how to answer some of these, I want you to reflect on how you've answered in the past, and if there's any way that you can add a little bit more detail or challenge yourself to make those answers a little bit more close to what you might say in a conversation with an English speaker. All right? So with that in mind, let's get to the 5 things that you should definitely know how to say in Spanish when responding to questions. And the first one is pretty common, and I know you probably already know how to answer this one, and it is ¿de dónde eres? ¿De dónde eres? And that's the informal way of saying where are you from. In the formal setting, you would say ¿de dónde es usted? ¿De dónde es usted? So you might hear either one of those depending on the situation that you're in. And this is a very common question that you'll get asked, especially if you're in a place where it's clear that you're a non-native speaker of Spanish and people might just be curious as to where you're from. It's also something that commonly comes up if you're in a language exchange or you're having a conversation with someone for the first time. They're generally going to ask, where do you live? Which is ¿dónde vives? Or ¿dónde vive? If I'm using usted. Or where are you from? ¿De dónde eres? So those are the 2 things you might hear. Now, it's really important to know how to say the name of where you're from in Spanish. So you can say, for most of you, it would be soy de Estados Unidos, or maybe soy de Inglaterra if you live in England. But you want to make sure you know how to say your country in Spanish and also the city that you're in. Because, a lot of times this is an opportunity for you, especially if you're talking to someone in a language exchange or even a tutor or a teacher that's in a Spanish-speaking country. They may not know a lot about where you live. So you want to think about that you want to be able to explain it in relationship to something that people actually know about. So, for example, if I say, soy de Estados Unidos, I'm from the United States, or I say, vivo en Estados Unidos, which I live in the United States, that's a very limited answer. You probably are going to want to add a little bit more detail. Now, I've learned from experience, if I just tell someone the name of the city that I'm from and they're not from the U.S., they generally look at me with a blank stare. And it's because there are several cities in the United States that are pretty famous. So you probably want to learn how to talk about where you live in relationship to one of those cities. So, for example, I might tell someone, vivo cerca de Nueva York. I live near New York. Now, do I really live very close to New York City? No. But at least if I say Nueva York, they'll go, oh yeah, I know New York, because everyone knows New York, right? You can also say vivo en la costa este. Vivo en la costa este. So I live on the East Coast, or vivo en la costa oeste. Vivo en la costa oeste. I live on the West Coast. Or you can say vivo cerca de Los Angeles. Even if you live 6 hours from LA and you're in Northern California, right? Generally, no one's going to really know that. Now, if you want to get into the intricacies of explaining that, oh, vivo en el norte de California, es como 6 horas de Los Angeles. That's very, very helpful because, again, you want to be able to describe where you live in relationship to something or somewhere that people understand. So keep that in mind and work on this, right? You want to think about how would you really explain this to someone who's not from where you're from and doesn't really know that much about the U.S. Now, obviously, if you're talking to someone in the U.S., you can just say the city that you're from or the state. But make sure you know how to say that in Spanish. Don't just revert to, yo vivo in Virginia, because you would say Virginia, right? So just, again, know the pronunciation and just kind of use the Spanish pronunciation rules for your city when in doubt. Like, for instance, for Chicago, you would probably say Chicago. Just try to, again, keep that. You don't have to, some people think that's a bit extra. But I just tend to like to keep my pronunciation flowing. So I won't say, oh, yo vivo en New York. I'll say vivo en Nueva York. So, just kind of keep that in mind. So you want to be able to describe where you're from in relationship to something that people really understand. All right. So that's the first question you should definitely know how to answer. De donde eres o donde vives. And it's not de donde vives. So if you're asking someone else this question, de donde eres is like from where are you? Or donde vives, where do you live? There's no de donde vives. Okay. So after you kind of get that out of the way, you try to explain to someone where you live in relationship to a city that people actually may have heard of. Then you're going to go into answering another very common question. ¿A qué te dedicas? ¿A qué te dedicas? Or ¿a qué se dedica? In the usted form or the formal way. And that's, what do you do for a living, right? Literally, like, to what are you dedicated? What's your profession? Someone might also ask you, ¿qué haces? Like, what do you do? ¿Cuál es tu trabajo? What's your job? So you should definitely know how to answer that, And again, for this is one that people get tripped up on, especially as beginners. It's when you're talking about your profession, you don't use the word a or an, right? Like, I wouldn't say I am a teacher if I'm speaking Spanish. I would just say soy profesora or soy maestra, not soy una profesora or soy una maestra. So keep that in mind. You would just say the name of your profession. So for instance, if you're a nurse, you would just say I am enfermera. I am a nurse, but you don't use una in Spanish. So soy enfermera is the grammatically correct way to answer that question. Now, again, if you already have that down, and you don't want the conversation to simply cut off with that one short statement, I encourage you to add more details to this. So maybe you want to explain where you work. Okay, entonces, yo soy profesora de inglés, trabajo en una escuela secundaria. And, you might want to, talk about how long you have been doing your profession. Or you might want to talk a little bit about what your day is like. Normalmente, and yo vivo en casa, o no vivo, perdón. Normalmente trabajo en casa. So I work at home like many people are have been for the past 18 months or 2 years or so. Or you might want to say, trabajo en una oficina con un equipo de 10 personas. So I work with a team of 10 people. Me gusta mi trabajo porque me da la oportunidad de enseñarles a mis estudiantes muchas cosas importantes. So, you want to be able to talk about your job. I like my job because I get to teach students really important things, or I get to influence the next generation if you're a teacher. But you want to, again, think about what you want to communicate about your job instead of just saying, soy profesora, right? Soy enfermera. Soy gerente. I'm a manager. Add more details to that. Talk about where you work. Talk about what you like about your job. Talk about what you don't like, maybe. But this is a place where you can definitely begin to add more detail and more fluidity to your conversations and practice that so that the next time you're asked, you really have an answer ready to go. So again, if you're a super beginner, I would just kind of stick with the basics. But if you're advanced beginner or intermediate, try to push yourself to be able to say more things about your job a little more fluently. And even, of course, if you're a student, you can say soy estudiante, and you can talk about the subject that you're studying and why you like that. So that's some important vocabulary for you to get to. All right. Okay. So we got 2 so far. De donde eres, or donde vives, and a qué te dedicas. Another very common question that comes up is, ¿dónde aprendiste español? Or ¿cómo aprendiste español? Right? So how or where did you learn Spanish? And this is super common. Again, if you start talking to someone in Spanish, this happened to me at the gas station actually a few weeks ago. The clerk at the desk, I noticed that she spoke Spanish, and so she was kind of struggling to find a word, so I just responded to her. And then she was like, "Oh, hablas español?" I said, "Sí," and she's like, so she's asking me like, ¿dónde aprendiste? Because she's curious, because she knows that I'm not a native speaker, so she's curious as to where I learned Spanish, because she was kind of surprised that I speak the language. So you'll get that depending on who you're talking to, what you look like. People have different perceptions of what a Spanish speaker looks like. Some people might mistake you for a native speaker. Some people might have a perception that someone who looks like you is not a native speaker, even though we know, right, that there are so many different types of people that speak Spanish. Being a Spanish speaker is not a race, right? It doesn't have a look. Even being Latino or Latina or being from a certain country, you could be any color, shade of the rainbow. But, we do have these stereotypes. So sometimes people might assume that you are or are not a Spanish speaker. So inevitably the question will come up, especially if you start speaking and they hear that you have a bit of an accent. They'll ask you, like, where did you learn? So this is something you should be prepared to answer. Or, you might even give a little bit of a story as to why you decided to learn. You could say something like, aprendí en la universidad, so I learned in college, which is probably not true, because most people who learn a language in school don't speak it very well. No, joking. Some people do actually have some success with learning at the college level, at the university level. Not so much in high school. But you can just say, aprendí español en la universidad, or estudié español en la universidad. So I learned or I studied Spanish in college. You can also say, estudio por mí mismo o por internet. Tomé clases en línea. So I took classes online. Or you can say, tomo clases online or en línea. Either one works. Online is kind of English word, but it's kind of accepted in the Spanish-speaking world, like some phrases related to technology don't necessarily have to be translated. But, you can sort of explain how you learned. You probably won't say that you downloaded an app and that's how you became successful with having the conversation. But you can say, tengo una profesora de español, o tengo un coach de español, hablo con ella cada semana. So I have a teacher or a coach in Spanish that I talk to every week. Something like that. So again, be prepared to answer this question, because sometimes, often it comes up, and try to give as much information as you would like, right? Explain to the person why you love the language, what is it that attracted you to it, because people are sometimes just curious as to why you even decided to learn a foreign language, especially for people that aren't language learners. They don't really understand why people do this. So it's important to be able to respond to this question with some fluidity. So work on your answer to that. Think about how you want to respond and what you want to communicate when you get asked this question, because I guarantee you, if it hasn't already, it will happen. You will get asked, ¿cómo o dónde aprendiste español? O también, ¿cómo o dónde usted aprendió español? All right. The next question, this could come in a variety of ways that you should be able to answer, is related to your family. So someone might ask you, ¿tienes hijos? Do you have children? ¿Cómo es tu familia? They might ask you if you're single, soltera, soltero, or married. ¿Tienes esposo, esposa? Do you have a husband or wife? So in general, something might just come up about family, right? And it could come in a couple of different ways. O con quién vives, like who do you live with, right? And so you want to be able to talk about your family, right? You might want to say, vivo con mi esposo y mi perrito. I live with my husband and my dog, my puppy. You might want to say, be able to say your children's names and ages. Tengo 3 hijos. And hijos works even if you have hijos works if you have daughters and sons, because you're just saying you have children. If you only have daughters, you would say hijas. But if you have, children that are both male and female or all male, you would say hijos. So tengo 3 hijos, un varón de 2 años. So I have a 2-year-old boy. You can say, again, just learn how to say the ages. And another question that usually comes up when you say that you have children, they usually won't say cuántos años tiene, like how old are they? They would probably say de qué edad, like what age, de qué edad. So you might get asked like, well, what age? If you say, tengo 3 hijos. De qué edades? Like what ages are they? And you would say, tengo un varón de 2 años. And varón is a way that you can refer to a male child. Or you can say, tengo un niño. I have a boy that's 2 years old. O tengo un bebé. You can also say, tengo una niña. I have a girl que tiene 3 años. So just know how to say, the ages and names of your children, or just, you might want to even explain where they live. If you have adult children, tengo una hija, ella vive ahora en Nueva York con su esposo. So she lives in New York with her husband. So just be familiar with some of these phrases and be able to describe your family situation. So you want to be able to talk about who you live with, and where your family lives in general, if they don't all live in the house with you, if they're a little bit older, and even like where your parents live, where your brothers and sisters live. You can say tengo un hermano o tengo una hermana. So I have a brother or a sister que vive en la misma ciudad. So I have a brother or sister that lives in the same city. So just think about, again, ways that you want to talk about your family, because, again, this will come up in a conversation. Generally, people want to know a little bit about you and who you live with and who's close to you. So think, again, about ways that you can make your answer to that question a little bit more fluid. Now, the final question I want to cover that you should definitely know how to answer is one that you might think is a little bit boring, but I promise you, it's important, because not only is it a way to start a conversation, but it's also something that generally comes up, and it's considered small talk. But I think a lot of people overlook this, and they really don't know how to say certain things because they just kind of know the basics. So I want you to really think about this as it relates to where you live, and whether you're on a Zoom call or meeting someone in person. This is definitely something that you should know how to discuss, and that is the answer to the question, ¿Cómo está el clima? Or, ¿Cómo está el tiempo? Or, ¿Qué tiempo hace? So these are all related to the weather. So, ¿Cómo está el clima? Is more like the weather in general, right? The climate. So, ¿Cómo está el clima en Nueva York? ¿Cómo está el clima ahora en tu ciudad? So, how is the weather right now where you are? How's the weather in New York? And this will come up probably if you're on like a Zoom call or, Skype or whatever, or you're on the phone and you're talking to someone. Again, it's small talk, right? But it's something that definitely comes up, especially if you're in a place that has severe weather, or it's really cold and you hate the cold, or it's really hot and you hate the heat, right? It's going to be on your mind. So you want to be able to talk about it. No me gusta el frío. I don't like the cold. Hace mucho frío hoy. It's like really cold today. Está lloviendo, o ha estado lloviendo todo el día. So it's raining, or it's been raining all day. Está nevando. It's snowing. So again, I know these things sound small, but weather is something that affects all of us. So whether you're on a virtual chat or if you're in person, it's a great way to start a conversation, right? You do it in English. Maybe you're at the bus stop, you just arrive at a place and you get in and it's super cold outside, like it is a lot here lately. And you go in and the first thing you probably comment about is something in your environment. And what more common is there in your environment that you share with other people than the weather? So you might start a conversation with someone that you don't even know yet. You just kind of walk in and go, hace mucho frío hoy, ¿no? It's like, it's really cold today, isn't it? Sí, hace muchísimo frío. So then they respond, right? Oh, it's very, very cold. And then you have a conversation. Mi nombre es Tamara. Y tú? ¿Cómo te llamas? And, you'll be able to start a conversation that way. So even if you are starting to go out in person again, talking about the weather is a great way to start a conversation. And you want to be able to talk about things that you like and dislike about the weather as well, because it'll come up, right? If it's winter and you don't like winter, you'll be talking about how you want to go to a warm place. So you should know kind of how to say that, no me gusta el frío, prefiero el verano. So I don't like the cold. I prefer, or I would rather be in the summertime. So again, think about that. Think about little ways that you use this type of small talk in English, and try to be able to say these things a little more naturally in Spanish. Again, you don't want to say, hace calor, right? Oh, it's hot. You want to go, hace calor hoy, pero demasiado, no me gusta, que es muy caliente. And it messes up my hair. I don't know, whatever you want to say. Learn how to say those things. And again, think about ways to have these conversations more naturally in Espanol. Okay, so I hope that has been helpful. Again, the 5 questions you should know how to answer in Spanish. ¿A qué te dedicas? ¿De dónde eres o dónde vives? ¿Cómo es tu familia? So explaining some things about your family. ¿A qué te dedicas? What do you do for work? Y finalmente, ¿cómo está el clima? ¿O qué tiempo hace hoy? So that is what I have for you. Those are the 5 questions. I really want you to work on these and, really begin to think about how you can make your conversations flow a little bit better and sound a little more natural as you answer these common questions that come up in conversation. Now, I also have a little bit of a surprise for you. So for those of you who made it to the end of the episode, I want to let you know that we are running a special. If you would like our help with improving your conversation and even testing out your answers to some of the questions I mentioned in this episode to see, how can you make those answers a little more fluid, and getting some advice from one of the native speakers on our team to help you really refine your conversation and make what you're saying sound more natural and less like a script. We are offering 30% off of our language coaching service through the month of March. So if you're interested, just go to SpanishConSalsa.com/coach, and you can put in the code March30 to book your initial language coaching session with one of our amazing team members. And I always brag, I really do have the best team when it comes to learning how to speak Spanish and actually helping you get comfortable with speaking the language. I cannot say enough about the phenomenal women. And we do happen to right now still have a team of all females, but it's not intentional, but it is good to kind of have a team. But either way, make sure you jump on this opportunity. You get 30% off. You'll get an opportunity to practice your responses to some of these questions, improve your conversation skills, and really get to a point where you're comfortable communicating in the language and sounding more and more fluent. So again, SpanishConSalsa.com/coach to take advantage of that opportunity of 30% off coaching during the month of March. And as always, como siempre, I hope that something you heard in today's episode has helped you go one step closer from Spanish beginner to bilingual. Hasta la próxima.
Thank you for listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast at learnspanishconsalsa.com.